Next up, I'm very excited to introduce Jess Vogol, the VP of Growth Marketing at Movable Inc., as well as Caroline Bach, the VP of Marketing and Partnerships at Wizeline, to talk about building your ABM strategy. Caroline and Jess, over to you.
Thanks, Evan. Hi, Caroline. Nice to see you again.
Hey, good to see you.
So thanks everyone for joining us and the Bowery Capital team for inviting us today. I think we have so much to talk about, and we're really excited to take questions too. But before we get started, I think we've all heard this term ABM, account-based marketing, tossed around for a number of years. Caroline, what does ABM mean?
Yeah, so I think the shortcut that I usually use is that it's kind of flipping the funnel from traditional marketing. So a lot of times it feels like the marketing team is just waiting for leads to come in and then distributing those leads and then hoping something amazing comes of it. And the really cool part about ABM is that it's kind of reversing that thinking. You spend a lot of time up front on identifying your best leads, who are your best accounts, your best target accounts, and then the marketing team dedicates energy to making introductions to those accounts. So it's kind of a reverse of the traditional marketing funnel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I keep hearing the metaphor fishing with nets and spears, but I think your definition was so much better because it means so much more, and it means something different to every organization. So what does ABM look like for Wizeline?
So I think what's really cool about you and I having this conversation is that we're still so early on in it, speaking from Wizeline's perspective. So Wizeline is a product design and development company, and we're still pretty young in our marketing and go-to-market journey. We're only a 5 or 6 year old services business. So for us, we probably adopted the philosophy of ABM about a year ago, but didn't really start making concrete investments into it until November. So what we did, and it's interesting because I think we had different approaches to this. We broke it into 4 phases. We had a research phase, then an account selection phase. We ran a pilot, and then we mapped out what a go-to-market would look like with the sales team. And we're now in the go-to-market phase, and we really dwelled in the research phase, probably for too long, but we kind of broke it into 4 chunks. So we're not yet a year in to like a true investment, but we've probably been acting as a marketing team under an ABM style for a little over a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for us, it was interesting. So I'm the VP of Marketing at Movable Inc., which is a MarTech email marketing company. We started to shift our strategy in 2017 when ABM became like a trendy buzzword. I think we bought all of the tools that you could buy for gifting, for advertising, but we didn't really have our strategy completely fleshed out. We developed a list of around 1,500 accounts. And I think what we started to see was without that strategy and without really kind of tiering and prioritizing those accounts, we were still throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that something stuck. So for the past couple of years, Movable Inc. has definitely followed a target account strategy, but it wasn't until about 1.5 years ago when I hired someone, if she's on this call, Michelle, shout out, but to take over running our ABM program. And this was without any technology, anything kind of crazy, worked closely with RevOps and really started from scratch again on building that strategy. And we've just seen so much better performance and great results and internal buy-in when we approached it kind of the right way later.
Yeah, I think to your point, having at least one person full-time thinking about it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
How have you thought about like structuring your team around this? Like, what does the chart look like for you?
Yeah, so my aspiration, and I think as we'll see, doesn't always happen exactly how you hope, but is for my entire marketing team to be thinking in the ABM mind frame. So we think of it as ABM 1-to-1 ABM one to few, and then ABM programmatic. So kind of what you would traditionally consider a demand gen and marketing automation, we still want to, plan our campaigns with a focus there. And then our ABM lead works across our sales teams, our client teams, and then with the rest of the marketing team to figure out how can we either adapt what we're doing or spin up new programs that are going to directly reach those target accounts.
That makes sense. I think having that individual person who's responsible for evangelizing it across departments, we've found to be very helpful. Because I think that the more people who understand how it's supposed to function, the more buy-in we've been able to get. And I think I'd be curious what your experience is here, but I know when it started to work, it really brought down some silos internally. It really helped us think as a team, be more creative, but that buy-in has been so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've had similar experiences there where, we can have the grandest of marketing plans, but unless our sales teams and our partner teams believe in it and are bought into it, then it's going to be difficult. So there's a couple of things that we've tried. One, we typically like to pick one of our sales reps or, partner reps that is interested in piloting something with us. So we did a pilot looking at intent data, and because we had this rep really bought in and working alongside us, he was also able to help get people excited about it. And he had a little bit more of, let's say, the clout with his colleagues. So we were able to develop that trust by, doing these mini pilots. And then the other thing, I love Serious Decisions. They have a lot of great resources. We use their plan on a page template just to kind of get people used to seeing something in the same format. So they understand, like, okay, quickly I can get, like, who's this campaign going to? What's it for? What are the dependencies? I hate to use the word training, but it's just kind of getting people used to seeing that. So who all was involved in, obviously outside of you and your team, this shift to ABM at Wizeline?
I think one of the biggest advocates of it was our chief business officer, who's managing our sales team, because I think that he deeply understood the challenge that marketing was facing, which can sometimes be a really difficult and tense relationship between sales and marketing if you're not on the same page about where growth should come from. So I think aligning very early on in that regard, like this is the smartest way for us to grow our business. This just makes sense. We don't have enough time to pivot. So let's align on the philosophy, and then we'll bring in more folks as we go on the tactical. So for the pilot phase, we really just focused on one individual sales rep and brought him into the fold very early on. Was highly collaborative in developing that account list for the pilot. And I think that being a part of, like, having visibility into what that process looks like just made the buy-in not really a question when it came down to the follow-up of those programs, or understanding the value of participating in, the multi-stages of that campaign, which can be really tricky. It's a big investment of time. But what's been really lovely to see now that we're entering into more of a broader go-to-market phase is that person has become an advocate. And it's our life is so much easier because of that he's able to speak from his perspective and the value he's seeing from it, even if it doesn't always result in an immediate response or an immediate new.
Yeah, I think that's always a fun thing to see other teams get excited. We've seen when we've rolled out new programs, whether it's like landing pages or gifting, it is slow, and only, it's kind of hand raisers are able to get involved and partner with us early. But then once you see those one or two successful programs, then more people want to get involved, and we have to put more process around, like, who gets this level of support and budget and stuff like that. So it's the early adopters end up winning.
Absolutely. One thing that we had discussed before, which I think could be an interesting segue here, is, like, the importance of prioritizing and filtering, especially in the last few months, where a lot of marketers have found themselves in really challenging positions to throw away their 2020 marketing plans or light them on fire in some capacity. And for myself, I have found ABM to be a very useful framework to prioritize and filter. But I'd be curious to hear what you're doing with your team and kind of like respond to all this.
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that made it helpful to shift ABM was we have a really great RevOps team, and we have 5 or 6 different tiers of accounts based on different criteria, the other technology that they have. So we're really able to say, like tier 1s and 2 accounts, we're going to, have pipeline rally meetings or different things. But it's helped us to focus and to be able to say no to the things that are still important but aren't the highest priority right now. So I think that that's one of the things that's been helpful, just having very clear guardrails on, what's available to you, and, still being open to ideas and to do other things, but, getting people to understand that we only have so many people executing this. And then speaking of COVID, our budgets obviously took a hit. So, I think that the tiers have been one of the things that have just made it so much easier for us to say like yes or no.
Right. Yeah, I think from our side too, there was 2 things happening at once where we had created these campaigns and we had built up this momentum with maybe some industries that were going to be severely affected by COVID. And it no longer made sense, and it was no longer really appropriate for us to be dedicating so much energy to opening those relationships. But I think that before ABM, that would have been like an explosion of ideas of who that should be replaced with. And I think having that structure in place of these are the most attractive attributes of a business for us to target. And that doesn't really change in COVID. It may be the industries that we would consider will shift a little bit, or maybe our buyer has moved around, but we can still kind of lean on that framework. All of that initial groundwork wasn't for nothing. And I think it really helped us at least have some calm in the storm of our playbook still applies. Maybe we don't, I was mentioning this to you before, but we have a very traditional marketing team in a lot of ways. Like we do a lot of in-person events, and that's no longer an option. So I think there's going to be some aspects of marketing that we will have to change no matter what. And I think it was kind of this nice, reassuring piece of the puzzle that was already kind of sorted out. Like we already have that alignment. We can shift on the account targets, and we can dedicate the creative energy to figuring out what a new field marketing team looks like, or what a new event strategy looks like.
Yeah, and I was actually going to bring that up too. We talked a lot before about like shifting in person to digital and how challenging that's been just with the way that our teams are built. We obviously also did a ton of in person, and for ABM, especially on the executive level, that's often what you want. You want that in person relationship. I've actually heard from my events team though, who's now hosting virtual, that they're working closer with our ABM team than ever before. So they're kind of trying to figure out like what are these virtual experiences, whether it's inviting them to a roundtable or just engaging with them in another way that we can use as a replacement and add to that menu of available activities that we have.
I've seen the exact same thing. I think that the shift of the events team, the field marketing team needing to be digital has made them digital marketers like overnight, which has been really, really cool to see. And I think it broadens the view of what that team could be doing or might be interested in doing, and taking, I think what some of our ABM team has benefited from is the experiential side of field marketing can apply to other parts of marketing. So having that collaboration, I think, has been really healthy too.
Looks like we have some questions that have come in. So I know one of these we talked about on the phone. What criteria do we use to develop our target account lists? You want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. So for us, we looked at a list of probably a dozen or so attributes that were very like hard facts about the business. Revenue size, since we're in a product development company, the size of the IT organization, how many engineers do they have, is a pretty good proxy for how much technology work business they might have. We would look at location, since geography can be a constraint. We also looked into the technologies that the company is currently using. And then beyond the attributes of the company, ABM really focuses on the account itself. but we also spent a good amount of energy on understanding who the people are at the company who would be a good target for us, knowing that it's more likely than not for the decision that we're, the long sales cycle and decision-making process for our type of services. So I think it was pretty quick for us to get to that list of these are the 10 attributes that make sense for us to filter on, like mid-size to enterprise, North Americas, and parts of Asia Pacific. Like, it was easier for us to come up with that list, and we spent a little more energy on the people attributes themselves.
Yeah, for us, so when we initially started ABM, we actually did it. It was not at all scientific. Reps were saying, like, these are the 125 accounts in my territory that I think are going to be the best. Since then, we've evolved to looking exactly as you said, like the industries that they're in, because for us, we work with enterprise brands. We want to look at their email program volume, also the other technologies that they're using, and then just based on a number of factors, based on kind of what we've seen from our client base through the years. So we organize them into tiers of, like, there's the most sellable opportunity within this industry, and focus that way. We have had some things we've spun up tied to, like, these are companies that are either neutral or positively affected by COVID that we might want to reevaluate, you know, bringing in or having some focused campaigns to them.
That makes sense. This question might be a good one for you, Jessica. So I'll answer this one. Have you seen ABM have any impact on net promoter scores with newly converted clients who you've engaged using ABM tactics, or existing clients being run through ABM programs?
Yeah, so I hate to say this, but we are not very, we just kicked off NPS for like the third time this year. So I don't think that we have great data to really track what that's done for our client engagement. But I will say we use Visible. And so the Visible has an account engagement score called the PES. And we've seen our PES score, which is like an A to D rating, improve on accounts where we're running ABM programs. So we were able to do that with a lot of kind of things like gifting or other programs that might be harder to measure because they're offline. We've seen quarter over quarter and month over month like the engagement scores improve when we're running ABM programs.
That's awesome.
Are you guys looking at that right now?
Yeah, I would say that actually we very intentionally did not include existing customers in our pilot program to keep it clean. And so I'm not sure. I have a suspicion though that it will, because as with some of our larger existing customers, they're so big that expanding the realm of influence within them, like, it's hard to believe that won't move the needle, but probably too soon to say. When we run NPS again this fall, it'll be interesting to see if that's shifted at all, but probably a little too soon to say for us.
Yeah, great. Another question that we had was, do you have a mix in your marketing plan of more traditional demand gen activities versus what is spent on ABM? So for Movable, I'd say that budget-wise, our investment in demand generation right now is our marketing automation system. We use Marketo, and then some smaller scale like digital advertising. But we do invest significantly more in our ABM program. So that's kind of, it's difficult to give a percentage since a lot of around our budgets changed this year. But I'd probably look at it as like a 3-to-1 or 2-to-1 account-based activities, and that could be programmatic versus just traditional demand gen.
Yeah, I would say similar to you. We're using Marketo, and we purchased Engagio last fall, and it was funny.
Required? Do you get free demand base now?
I hope so, because we would have loved to use demand base, but we were priced out. So maybe we'll probably end up paying more than less, but so we use those two platforms. And that was a sizable marketing ABM investment for us. I would say that pre-COVID, we were probably almost 50-50 making investments in ABM oriented campaigns, whether that was a host of things, but mostly digital, and 50% traditional marketing. And that has really flipped. It's 80-20 now, probably. I mean, I'm using very rough numbers, but there's very little money. There's money that you can't spend on field marketing or some of the traditional marketing activities, or people are no longer in their offices. And so I think that it was much more heavily diversified pre-COVID, and I think that has kind of shifted a bit now.
Another question I see is someone asked, I'm a marketer for a small company who recently created the marketing role and department. For someone who's starting from scratch and working for a lead focused and sales company, what's an effective way to show the company some results on marketing efforts? I think if we're talking about, marketing efforts and then ABM, one of the things I would suggest is testing your existing programs against like applying an ABM lens to it. So if you were running a campaign for travel marketers that was a little bit more broad strokes, we might test and hold back 10 accounts from this general campaign and just test like the engagement, the email opens, responsiveness, etc. Obviously the opportunity and revenue things later. But, I think if there's only one marketer or a smaller marketing team, you can't try to boil the ocean. You're not going to be successful. So I think that's kind of how I would test. And then, as your internal teams start to see those results, it's easier to get buy-in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
And kudos to you for starting up a marketing organization.
Yes,
it's really hard. But I think for that, I've been in your shoes before. I think the best sign that things are working is that your sales team says that they are. And that can take a really long time to get there, but sometimes that's all you really need. If your sales lead just sees the value that you're bringing, or sees that your campaigns are materially driving results, whether that means that when they get on a customer call, they mention an email that sparked them to reach out, or a piece of content that reminded them that they needed to reach out to you. Those are all things that I think as a marketer, you'll want to celebrate and make some noise about, because that's the kind of traction and relationship building that will really matter. And then I think as you mature some of those programs and you're able to invest a little bit more on the technology side, a lot of what we use internally today is influence, because a lot of the restructuring that ABM forces you to do is looking at how many points of contact or how many touch points you have with the lead that you've already agreed is the right fit. So I think that it could be really healthy, especially if you have a very sales-driven organization, to have that alignment conversation with your sales leadership team, so you're not spinning your wheels, chasing every possible lead, and you can invest your energy more strategically, because as a team of one, it's going to be really challenging for you to focus.
Yeah, and I think it's the storytelling, and exactly as you said about getting your sales team or your stakeholders bought in. The more that they can see things in action or like kind of touch and feel it when possible, they get excited. Certainly marketing measurement's incredibly important, but there's a certain dose of skepticism that I've seen from other teams around like, well, did marketing really drive this revenue? Or maybe we think that you drove more. So I think that that's like finding the people who are engaged and excited about it and are going to be advocates. Like if they're telling the story for you, then it's a big win.
And one other thing I would add is I think that something you might run into early on is that if we use ABM or if we align around this strategy, this account list, does that mean you'll still be opportunistic? What if a lead we hadn't thought of walks in the door? Like, we need to make sure we still capture that lead, especially when your company is still young and hungry and really needs to capture all those opportunities. And I think that ABM doesn't mean that as marketers, you'll be closed off to opportunities you hadn't previously considered. That's a great data point for you to rethink maybe how you filtered the accounts that you ended up with. Or maybe it's an outlier and it's something that you can help the team achieve without distracting your overall strategy. But I think that having that kind of dialogue with your stakeholders can be super healthy. And this doesn't mean that if, XYZ dream company knocks on our door and they're not on my list, you're like a bouncer for who gets into the company. It just means that you have a pretty good idea between you of what a good fit looks like. And that can be a productive conversation, even if it seems silly, just to get out of the way.
Mm-hmm. We have one more question. I think we have only a couple more minutes, but how much time and effort and which resources or departments did you coordinate with during segmentation and creating your ideal customer profile?
I can start. So I think we spent too much time here.
I remember you shared that. You're like, it was too much.
It was too much. It was too much because I think that we made the mistake of doing research and then aligning. So our thought was we'll spend, we'll go off into a corner and come up with this really beautiful research proposal about who we should be targeting and who our personas are. And these are the company targets that we think we should go after, and then pitch that to sales versus getting some buy-in from the sales team first and then collaborating with them on that research. We would have saved ourselves a ton of time. So we used a tool called Discover.org, which was recently purchased by ZoomInfo. It's just like a giant org chart directory, which helped us kind of fill in the gaps of who our buyers might be, but also was really useful for us in filtering and had the data that we needed to filter. But that could be Crunchbase, that could be any number of platforms that have data that's relevant for your company. And then we did a lot of just like old-fashioned marketing research too on some of these companies. And doing some competitor research was also useful to give us an idea of maybe things we had not considered. So I don't know if you had a similar process, Jess, but we were probably a little too intense.
I think for us, what's interesting is more than 50% of our revenue comes from growth of existing client accounts. So we have a blend on our lists of net new prospects and then existing clients. We are lucky in that I have a really talented RevOps team. And so over the past couple of years, we would set a set of criteria and then really let the data tell the story for the year. So we think that we should tier based on enterprise brands in retail, travel, finance that have this email service provider, et cetera. And then over time, I think we started to see what factors went into like the revenue that we thought we were going to drive versus the revenue that we did drive. And maybe it's that, travel accounts are more likely to upsell quicker, or I just keep throwing out travel. Not a great example to use right now. But I think that was really like, we've had tiered lists for the past 2 years. And this year there was kind of like, all right, we made these tweaks to it. So based on, this minor thing. So for us, we looked at Capital IQ and Hoover's data in the past. It just didn't make as much sense because, we could sell to food and beverage, McDonald's is a client, but you would get like a big milk distributor in that same, if you pulled that same list. So, I think there's always going to be some human, like thought and curation applied. So it's kind of blending like the data that you have access to, testing out some theories, and, like you need people to take a look at it and validate if this actually makes sense. And we spent, I'd say, probably months on not kind of full-time work for everyone for months, but it took a couple of months to get things to where they are right now. And we're still kind of adjusting and looking at the numbers. Obviously, with COVID, our anticipated things have changed too, but I think that's what it's not. I don't see it as something that's set it and forget it. Things are going to change about your business and your customer profile. Things are going to change in the world. So having those lists and then, figuring out how you can improve them without spinning your wheels and driving everyone crazy.
Absolutely. I know we have just a few minutes left. So I think we answered questions as they came in. I don't know if there are any closing questions from the group. Otherwise, we're probably really close on time.
Any final questions from folks?
I think I'll ask if we can wait for one more question. If there's one investment in ABM that you would like to make, should our COVID budgets and everything rebound, what's something that you'd be excited to try out?
Ooh, I think right now we're playing around with webinars as like an experiential cap to a campaign. Like they've engaged with all of our heavy stuff. Like, let's do something fun. I would love to do something fun. I'm not sure if a webinar will have the same joy factor as going to a cool dinner would. So I'm excited to get back to that of like getting, because when you have in-person events or when you have something that's a little more sales oriented, you can just feel if it works. I think that the
Mhm.
data driven stuff is important, amazing, critical, it's a requirement, but having some of those in-person moments to say like, oh, this worked. This person had never heard of us. They've come through this and now on the other side and they're enjoying this. They're collaborating with us, and it's like a beautiful thing to see in person. So I think that
Mhm.
that's one thing I would love to invest in again, is having some of those really experiential marketing moments. What about you?
Mhm. Well, so I keep saying this. I've wanted demand-based for like 2 years. We
Mhm.
also were pretty close to making that investment, and then our budgets shifted. But I think that for Movable Inc, we want to shift the perception of ABM as like gifting and landing pages. So I am excited if and when it happens to kind of bring some more technology. But I think it was never the right time to do it before, because we didn't have a strategy around what we were going to do with it.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you both, Caroline and Jess, so much for spending time with us today. Really appreciate you teaching us more about how to build an ABM strategy. That was great.